All right, Sergey, you're good to start.
Okay, good morning, everyone. This is a meeting of the Expenditure and Revenue Study Committee Futures Subcommittee on Wednesday, January 14th. We'll do a quick roll call. Chair Green.
Here.
Cliff Brown.
Here.
I am here, Sergio Modigliani.
Sadaf is coming in.
Sadaf Cosme.
She's just coming in.
I'm here. I just
Great. All right.
Thanks.
And Val Frias, I don't see. But we have a quorum, so we're going to proceed. The first item would be to review the minutes of November 21st. Do I need to put those up, or does everyone recall? Or did anyone have any comments? I'll take a motion.
I move approval.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Chair Green?
Aye.
Cliff Brown?
Sure.
Sadaf?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. The next set of minutes were from December 17th. Do we need to review those or look at them, or are there any comments? I'll take a motion. Oh, Cliff?
I don't believe I have reviewed those carefully, but so I'll abstain, but you guys can vote, please.
All right. So you want to make the motion anyway?
Sure, I'll move approval of the minutes.
Okay, so second, and we'll do a roll. Chair Green?
Aye.
Cliff Brown?
Abstain.
Abstain. Sadaf?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye, and so that takes care of the minutes. So the next item was maybe a little bit of a brief update. As you may know, the advisory committee met last night I think for the first time this year, and got a briefing from Melissa Goff on a number of items, but primarily it was a long-range financial plan that was circulated. I don't know if any members had wanted to make any comments or offer any thoughts. I know that I was there, Cliff was there.
Lincoln was there.
And Lincoln was there, that's right.
I'll just say that the numbers that were presented, I believe, were the numbers that the select board saw back in the fall. So they're the numbers that we've already seen. So I don't think there's anything new in as it relates to that.
Well, just to be clear, there was a early December stack, essentially, that was presented actually by the town administrator. These were quite similar. There were a few tweaks, but generally I agree. Cliff, did you have any other?
Yeah, no, I was talking about Melissa's presentation.
Oh, got it. Yeah, okay.
Which is the long-range financial forecast that we'd already seen.
Yeah,
Yeah, the town administrator's presentation, leaned into a little bit of the stuff we saw last summer, but I found the discussion to be going into more depth on issues that ERSC has not really reviewed or weighed in on, and I was actually a little surprised at some of that.
Just to be clear, by your reference to ERSC is the Expenditure and Revenue Study Committee, an acronym which I had not previously heard.
Okay, sorry.
May be useful.
It's useful for me. Sorry.
It sounds too much like gas.
Okay. I will, I'll change.
No,
No, I
whatever-
think it's fine.
whatever works.
It's fine. So Cliff, can you give an example of, and I didn't watch the meeting last night. I'll take a look at it in the next day or so. Can you give an example of something that might have been raised that hasn't been discussed at expenditures and revenues?
Well, I think that there was a more in-depth discussion about what the select board or staff at least has been talking about with regard to making cuts in a no override scenario. And it touched on certain things such as cuts to the planning department as one item that I not only found surprising that we hadn't talked about, but I think if you watch the replay, you'll certainly hear that I was actually surprised that that would be a direction to go in.
Right.
And the philosophy of what I took as a last in, first out philosophy with regard to hires, which sort of, does not really account for what's the strategy you're trying to put in place to help the town not eliminate the need, because that's not going to happen for future overrides, but mitigate it, and what sort of infrastructure is required in order to do that on a continual basis. And at one point, I didn't mention this last night, but at one point, the town administrator referenced some of the BFAC recommendations. And one of those recommendations was actually the beefing up of the financial staff in town and in the schools. And the reason for doing that, when so many people look at those positions as sort of like, they don't do anything, right? It's just staff. It's more overhead as opposed to going into programs. But the point was that you need staff, that type of staff, to be able to do the analysis that helps you understand where you're spending money, understand whether there are efficiencies, be able to provide the sorts of detail and information and analysis that everyone, certainly an advisory and town meeting, is always banging the drum for. You can't do that work without an appropriate level of staffing. And from my perspective, the same comes around to planning. You can't be at all proactive, and you can't really be thinking about where can the town go if you don't have adequate staff in that realm. We have turnover every year on the select board. There needs to be some basic consistency, and if you're always going back to build up staff in reaction to specific situations, as opposed to having a permanent group that is really looking at things and trying to put things in place and working with town meeting, because it takes a long time to get things done, then you're always behind the 8 ball. So I found that approach to be something that should be talked about at this committee, however we're going to call it, and B, I just don't agree with the particular philosophy that was expounded. So
Thank you. That's cool.
Sir,
Actually,
thoughts?
I'd like to add a little bit to that. First of all, I think Cliff has correctly identified some of the same concerns that I had, that we heard for the first time, I think, in greater depth, perhaps what the 6th floor is thinking about in a no override situation, trying to prioritize those. And I was not comfortable with the methodology and the reasoning that led to those conclusions. The suggestion, for example, from the town administrator was that should the Chestnut Hill West zoning not pass, he would read that as an interpretation of the town's lack of interest in such new growth initiatives? And if that was the case, why would you want to keep people in the planning staff in the planning department? And so that would be, in his mind, a signal as a place to cut. And I think Cliff correctly pushed back on that premise, and that rejection of a particular zoning package, I think, should not be misread as an abandonment of the potential for net new revenue that development could offer. The other comment that I wanted to make was that because of our delay in schedule and the inability of our committee to get anything out into the public and in front of the select board, has meant that these kinds of conversations are clearly taking place anyway, and don't have the guidance or the benefit of the thinking that we've been doing. And I might add that it was striking to me that here we are last night with the entire advisory committee, also without the benefit of any of our thoughts and thinking. And so many of the comments and questions that were coming from the advisory committee, understandably, were kind of many of the same questions and thoughts that this body has expressed. So they were sort of, you can call it playing catch up or doing their own due diligence, whatever you wish. But it certainly was an example of the loss, I think, that has occurred, informational loss, and requiring them to sort of pick up from ground zero when they could have picked up the whole discussion at a higher level and therefore been able to penetrate perhaps more deeply. Anyway, those quick thoughts. Anyone have anything else on last night's meeting? Okay. The next item that we had was whether we've been working on this development kind of memo that we called originated originally by Chair Green and which by mutual agreement, I think Cliff and perhaps Sadaf have been working on. I didn't know whether you had something you wanted to share today or whether you wanted to have some discussion about particular issues on that question.
I don't think I don't have anything to discuss, but I will certainly tell people where we stand. You know, Sadaf and I have produced a draft between the two of us for us to look at. We have had 2 meetings with staff. The first one was with Kara Bruton by herself, and the second one was with Kara and Meredith Mooney, who is the head of economic development, the economic development division. And we had that on Monday. So we have not redone our draft. I also gave our draft to one individual to get their feedback and thoughts. And I still have not heard back from that individual. But you know, I do think we're coming close to being able to produce something, and you know, I'm happy to even produce it in draft form within the next week or so. You know, I think we all feel that there's a lot to be said, a lot that can be said, but we're also struggling a little bit to give hard details as it relates to forecasts and numbers. And I don't have an answer to that, because it's trying to predict the future that, you know, is sort of impossible to predict. But we are talking about how we can put some more, I guess, detail into the write-up at this point. So happy to answer any questions, or Sadaf can certainly add her views.
Sadaf, did you want to add?
No, nothing to add. I mean, that's accurate. Cliff has done the heavy lifting on the writing, and that's a good summary of where things stand.
I would add a couple of thoughts. First of all, we should acknowledge that we've received some comments from members of the public, including Paul Sainer, who's actually here on the call today. All of you know is the former longtime co-chair of EDAB, and he offered some perspectives which Cliff and Sadaf have received. And I think you're getting some other feedback as well. Given that Paul's on the call, I didn't know if there was any question that anyone wanted to direct to Paul, or Paul, whether you had anything to say this morning, since there's not much to be specific about.
So the only comment I would make is that we have comments, obviously, from there's the original memo from Chair Green. We have Paul's comments. We had comments from Ken Lewis, a current EDAB member who's been involved with lots of different things in town. We had some comments that Kara Bruton made with regard to Chair Green's original memo, I believe. And the write-up that we have been working on tried to incorporate as many of those comments that were not overlapping as we could, as we felt were appropriate. So the document as it currently stands is much longer and goes into more detail on some of the, the thoughts that Chair Green put down on paper at first. And I'm hopeful that the folks who did contribute, will find that the final memo, if we get there, will, will be inclusive of everyone's views, not on every single point, but broadly speaking. And I think I've been pretty pleased with some of the feedback we've gotten from the planning department in general, as it relates to some of the comments that people made. So.
I wanted to just add a couple of things which are slightly corollary, but I think are still related. As many of you know, with the Chestnut Hill West initiative that's been ongoing really over the last 6 months or more, we were provided a copy of what's called the financial impact model, which was prepared by a consultant engaged by the planning department by the name of RKG. And that is a model which tries to assess the incremental costs to the town from new development in order to derive the net new revenue impacts. Because, we all understand that you bring more folks in, there are certain services that the town has to provide, whether it's fire, police, schools, whatever it may be. And that model is very, I think, critical to the ability to evaluate a development proposal and understand what is the net new revenue. And that model is very opaque. We learned that, much to my surprise, the planning department agreed to a non-disclosure with the consultant, which meant that essentially the model is proprietary and only certain members of this community have been provided with the access to what I would otherwise call a black box. And the major question is that those of us who've looked at it are kind of unable to replicate the numbers that are being suggested for these incremental costs. And since this is so central to the conversation, we put this question back to our planning director, Kara Bruton, and she has agreed to communicate with the consultant and plans to join us at our next meeting, which is Friday, the 23rd at 8 o'clock, to try to help us better understand the model and the answers to the questions that you may recall we had distributed to her, I think about 3 weeks ago, sort of in the middle of December. So I just wanted to give that update and put that on the record for that point. I also understand that the CAG, the Citizens Advisory Group, apparently met yesterday for the last time. I didn't realize that, but I think they are basically closing up shop at this point. So the fact that the model that we're relying on may or may not be accurate seems like an important question to try to put to bed and give us confidence that the work that has been done is, reasonable. And we all agree that these are, this is an art, not a science. And the point here is not precision, but confidence in the reasonableness of the information. Reasonableness, which then can be relied upon by the community and eventually by town meeting in trying to evaluate the proposition that's being put forth. All right. So the next item are really a series of updates, which are mostly, I think, to help me and the committee understand where we are and how things are going. And in no particular order, these are, the first one was the current and projected public schools of Brookline budget updates and override implications. Sadaf, I don't know if you wanted to briefly touch on that.
Yeah.
Hey,
So
Sergio, can I butt in for a second?
Of course.
Cliff, could you share what you're working on with me?
You mean the draft?
The draft of the memo.
development.
If I do that, then it has to be released publicly because Sadaf and I are already looking at it. And if we include you, then it's 5, the 3 out of 5.
Okay.
That's the reason I haven't.
Okay, so another example of the public records law, the open meeting law, impeding our operations, but that's fine.
May I suggest that perhaps as Cliff and Sadaf work along over the next few days, they may get to the point where they're ready to share something with the future subcommittee, at which point it could happen then, Cliff, perhaps?
Yeah, no, we've waited because we knew we were going to have the second meeting with
Right, with Kara.
with Kara. I do want to talk to David Lescalier about land banks, because that's one of the things that we're just going to put in. Whether or not there's anything to do there, who knows, but it's been raised by folks, and so I want to get his thoughts, because I think he's more up to speed on the issue than most people are. But and I want to get some feedback from one other person, and otherwise at this point it's sort of refining what we're doing, what we've been doing. So I am hopeful to be able to get that done in the next several days, but I do need to talk to a couple of people.
All right.
I will say, Bernard, for what it's worth, every topic that was in your memo is still there. I think what we've done is we've tried to expand things and try to put more of an educational spin on some of it. That's part of what we've been doing. A draft obviously will have some thoughts about recommendations and conclusions, but that's not for ultimately Sadaf or me to actually say, but it's to have the most productive draft. I think that we're going. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry,
Yep.
Sadaf, for interrupting.
yeah, no problem. So an update on the budget. So we did review what the schools had come up with in right before the holidays. So we had a meeting on December 19th where we reviewed the information that the schools had shared with the school committee on December 18th. And there were a number of questions. What we were told then is that there's still some ongoing work that's happening related to efficiencies. And so Superintendent Wong had anticipated that as she and her team iterate through the the forecasts, that they expect the cost to go down over time.
Am I correct that the current gap was initially projected at 13 roughly million?
Yeah, it was somewhere in that range. I'm just pulling up that. Yeah, so it was somewhere. I think it was like 12 and change. And right now the gap is 9.95 was the last iteration. So that was an increase of just shy of 7%.
That's just for the first year.
That's correct. That's the first year, and then subsequent years were so fiscal 28 was incremental 5.6 million, and then and I can actually pull this up real quick if people want to look at it while I chat. Hold on one second.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are actually publicly available
They are publicly available.
documents. So
This is all publicly available information. Yep, that's right. So this is what I was referring to, the 9.95. There were a series of outstanding questions. So some of the questions included the out of district placement for students to be tuitioned in to Brookline. Specifically, the opportunity in the near term was related to Winthrop House. The PSB team is doing some additional work on that. Some of that information is actually going to the finance subcommittee this week to figure out how they might price that for students who would be tuitioned in. So that is something that requires additional work. There was some work that was being done related to the tech costs. So there was additional information that the team was gathering related to that. So those were some of the highlights. An additional piece that wasn't covered in that conversation was on potential revenue associated with rentals. So this is something that the PSB team had committed to looking at within the context of the budget forecast work. And that's why, we didn't sort of dig into it separately, although Cliff has done some legwork around this more broadly around facilities rentals. So those are sort of the three areas that require additional evaluation. The follow-up is that by the end of this month, we're targeting our meeting on January 26th. The PSB admin team will be doing another revision of the forecast, and they intend to come to our meeting on the 26th to answer questions on that incremental revision of the forecast, of the multi-year forecasts. So that's the key next step. There are some questions that had been compiled by Dick that will be sort of discussed whether those are viable or not viable. So that's one of the things that's happening that came up on the call that we had as a subcommittee on Monday. And we have not seen their override scenarios yet. So this has not been something that's publicly shared due to the sensitivities is what Superintendent Wong has shared, which I understand. So we do not have visibility into what that means from for potential no override scenarios, or whether they're looking to tier it the way I believe that the town is. And then I had one other point which has escaped me. So that's the high level summary. I don't know, Cliff, if you have anything to add to that, but that I tried to pull in the headlines on that.
No, I nothing really specific. I will touch base on the revenue opportunity for facilities usage, and while we're take a step back, about 6 weeks ago, a month ago, Sarah Mockeder introduced me to one of her neighbors who has a partner, and they are both very involved in youth sports here in Brookline as coaches, and have worked with the rec department and the schools in terms of developing programs and implementing them. And they believe that there are significant opportunities in after school building usage. And so I met with them, one of them, and then I had both of them meet with myself and Chaz back in December. And after that, at the end of that meeting, we asked them for a memo, which they've provided to me, which I've reworked and have had some conversations with them. And I do hope also to have that memo in draft form to be available for the school subcommittee within the next week or so. It is an opportunity that probably, it probably could be implemented, during the 3 years we're looking at, but it's also possible it spills over. It's interesting. What is most interesting to me about it is what these two folks said in their write-up is not exactly the same, but pretty close to what the 2014 Override Study Committee said about the exact same issue. A number of the points that they make are exactly the same ones that were made 10 years ago, and which had recommendations for the school committee and the town to look at this issue. And that work has never been done. And so I'm hopeful that, because there's going to be certainly a recommendation that something be done to actually evaluate this information that is based upon what happens in other communities in terms of revenue opportunities for after school building facilities. And I personally think it should be broader and be looking at all recreation activities in town, because one of the things that they say, and I'll tell you, since I wrote this thing 10 years ago, this is not coming from just residents. Some of the comments were coming from staff in terms of the lack of coordination between schools and rec, and the lack of centralization of information and management of town facilities broadly. That's real estate as well as, parks and stuff like that. And I've asked both the town and the schools for information regarding existing contracts, existing use schedules, what have you. I haven't received anything. I don't think I'm going to. And some of this information should be available at the push of a button. And to the extent it's not, I think it's just the inability to fulfill a simple request like that sort of highlights the inefficiencies that exist and the confusion that exists in the community in terms of being able to understand what's available, when it's available, how much it might cost, how it is that outside groups have use of facilities when residents aren't able to get into them in certain points in time. There's a lot to unpack here and look at. But it's the responsibility ultimately for both the town and the schools. And that's going to be our recommendation. Lincoln.
Good morning again. Cliff, I just wanted to offer my assistance, to the whole subcommittee, but to you specifically, Cliff, in getting information. I hadn't, I didn't know that you're having issues getting some of the information regarding contracts or whatever, but I just wanted to offer my help in getting that.
Fair enough. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
if you'd like to forward that to me, I will do my darndest to get that information.
Fair enough. Thanks, Lincoln.
Thanks very much. So you guys, I've got the screen share for the agenda just so we can keep in front of us the menu of these different items. And I think we've covered basically the first three, which were the budget updates, the revenue generating, and maybe something about the efficiencies and consolidation. I'm not quite sure who's covering that point, but that must be over at the schools at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. And what Superintendent Wong had said was that these are things that they're looking at, and that subsequent iterations of the budget will include incremental efficiencies, and that some of that work is in flight.
Okay.
So I think the efficiencies that are not covered there are related to potential consolidation of resources or departments or sort of shared resources between town and school, which which I think technically is probably part of 5D or 5F because those were discussions that were supposed to be undertaken as part of TSP and or discussed, I believe, through conversations between chairs Green and Fries.
So let's talk about that for a minute. One of the items that was back in early November was item D, which was the status of the town school partnership meetings concerning the healthcare splits. And it was at the time, it had been discussed as the chair of the school committee, Val, and the chair of the select board, Chair Green. Are there any updates on that conversation? And have there been town school meetings that have had a chance to address this?
No,
Can I ask, sorry, Bernard, can I ask what you mean by healthcare splits? Is this just the above the line, below the line discussion? Or,
Or about
for the 83,
8317.
17.
okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chair Green?
I don't think that town school partnership is going to have too much to say about that split because it's tied up in the contracts, labor contracts, and that's a long process. I think there was some discussion in one of the materials that the school subcommittee put out that I read recently. The town school partnership meeting has not been set up. I've talked to Charlie, and we're trying to find a date when we can have our next meeting where some of these issues can be discussed.
Okay.
There has been discussion, just to elaborate on that. This has come up, the school subcommittee. We talked about it. I can't remember if it was this past week or the week before. But there is, there isn't much that's viable in the near term because of the contracts, as Chair Green had mentioned. And there is some discussion that's happening between Chaz and Superintendent Long as well on this front.
Okay.
That's the update we have on our side.
So I just wanted to circle back on one item. Sadaf, I think you indicated that the schools, meaning the PSB Finance Subcommittee,
Yes.
what is meeting, is it Thursday?
I think that subcommittee meets before that, and I don't know if it was yesterday or if it's today, I don't remember. But what they were looking at specifically was how to price out of district placements. So what students who are tuitioning in would pay to participate, for example, in Winthrop House, the middle school program, which is what's on the table in the nearer term.
Okay, but I thought also that the superintendent was hoping to provide big picture updates around deficit override and her plan to narrow the gap. Is that going to the school committee?
So all of the information related to that budget will go to the school committee before it comes to
Got it.
our subcommittee. That's that's sort of the process that they.
Yeah, no, understood. And we don't have a date or time yet on that. I thought that she had committed to sharing some of that information.
Yeah, so she had committed to sharing the next iteration of the budget or the forecast on January 26th at the school subcommittee meeting on January 26th, which then means that it would be the week before at the school committee meeting when she would have to share that with the schools.
And my
And
understanding,
Mariah, just one last thing, Mariah is validating that is still happening, that's on track. And that was the next step that came out of our meeting on Monday.
But I also recall that generally the superintendent is invited to present her budget to the select board. Am I correct in that recollection?
I'm not aware of that, of what the timeline is for that, or that there's a committed date for that.
Typically, it's sort of early February, part of the getting the budget going. Am I remembering this wrong?
So I know that there have been a number of target timelines, and I'm not sure what date was actually committed to, or that presentation would be any different from what we've seen so far.
Yeah, no, I think it would be just an opportunity to formally present it
Mhm.
to the select board. Okay.
So
Go ahead, Cliff.
yeah, the school subcommittee that Sadaf referenced, the presentation on out of district is this evening. It's on the 14th. It's tonight. I think it's starting at 5 o'clock is probably generally when that subcommittee starts. And Mariah likes to keep it at about an hour. I think this might go a little bit longer, but
Okay, so there's some updates there. All right. The next item, I guess, was the school model analysis type document, which is actually a broader discussion, and we, I think, have a draft of that. And I don't know what you guys wanted to do. Sadaf, did you want to discuss or introduce that, or just share it? I think you sent it around.
Yep, I sent it around. I had asked Nicole to forward that meeting from Monday to this group, just so you could attend that meeting and listen if you wanted. Obviously, the recording is available. We had a conversation on the document that has been shared publicly. I sent the link around again last night to this group. People had questions on the analysis. There's the focus of that analysis is to really say at steady state what could be the cost savings if we were to essentially redistribute students across our existing buildings. And some of those might be as in a middle school model, and then scenario number 5 actually looks at, hey, if we were to just redistribute students with an eye towards fixing classroom size, what would that look like? So it gives you a feel for what the potential cost savings are. Because PSB was unavailable to collaborate with us on this effort, we're limited in the analysis that we can do, and it does not contemplate, other things around, what is the right educational model in different scenarios, what are the implications of this, et cetera. But there is a lot of interest in the town from certain segments of the school parent population to take a look at what is being done within the middle school more broadly, and to think about how we could expand programs or options, opportunities, differentiation for middle school students. Anyways, feel free to take a look at this if you haven't already. Again, this was shared last week in preparation for the subcommittee meeting that we had on Monday evening. The discussion with the subcommittee, the conclusion or sort of the recommendation that we aligned on was that we would like to include, and obviously we'd share this with the broader expenditures and revenues group, but we think that there is enough cost savings opportunity here that this requires or it warrants further analysis that would require either a PSB to drive that analysis, or to look at bringing in a consultant to think through this further. And there's some potential opportunities related to looking at buffer zones and adjusting the buffer zones to think about whether that gives us some efficiencies via classroom consolidation and taking another look at class sizes, right? There's a pretty significant disparity across different schools and average class sizes that creates inefficiencies in the system, so to speak.
Yeah, so I put this draft up on the screen share for a moment. I found it packed full of very interesting information. And my thought here was to, although you've now shared it with the Futures group, I think there's a lot of information here that would be helpful to the whole sixth floor team and to the select board. And so perhaps with the help of Nicole, and now that since we have Lincoln on the call, to make you aware that the draft is there, and suggest that they might want to take a look at it. And I think what we probably want to do is to let this percolate for a few days here, and we'll put it up on the agenda for the meeting of the Futures Committee on the 23rd, with an opportunity for some discussion and feedback. That makes sense?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. And the only other thing I'll add to that is that Sid, who has been working with me on this, he actually drove scenario 5 primarily. He and I chatted, and we're just going to do another, take another look and at this, and so we might make some revisions between now and the end of this month as well.
Yeah, and scenario 5 was this sort of unusual thought that maybe there are really no more neighborhood in the sense schools, but rather a redistribution, which is directed towards optimizing the use of the public schools of Brookline's resources and teaching staff, as well as the physical facilities, the schools themselves, and the number of classrooms that they have, and so forth. And again, these are draft ideas, but this is great. All right. Going back to the agenda here, if I can pull this up. Sorry, I'm a little klutzy with all of this. Okay, so that took care of 5E. On 5F, what I understand, this is the town school MOU, which, as I understand, was done in September. One of the components of that, which I think was of particular interest to this group, was the idea of quarterly financials being reported by the PSB administration to the school committee. Having now closed, the second quarter, and we're 2 weeks into into January, I'm imagining that this financial update is going to be part of what goes to the school committee at their next meeting. Does anyone know if that's the case? Okay. I mean, one of the things that's been interesting to me is that one of our colleagues on this committee, Jesse Hefter, who happens to be not only on the school committee, obviously, but is on the finance subcommittee, he's been tracking the warrants essentially that are put through by the administration for payments. And he's done this sort of personally, created his own software, and has been trying to keep track of the payments and trying to keep track of it in relation to the school calendar year. That is doing the kind of functions that on the town side would be done by the financial team of how are we doing and are we over or under our projections. Sadaf.
Yeah, just one other thing that I wanted to add to this, if Sergio, you're done on 5F, were you?
Yeah, basically, I just found it amazing that this was a function that was being done essentially by an individual member of the school committee to try to keep track of the financial information, when it would seem to me that this would be one of the central functions of the public school administration. That was really the point.
Right. And, they obviously had a number of cuts, and I think they don't have the capacity within the department to do it. One thing I wanted to add, and I should have said this earlier, is for people who aren't aware, the collective bargaining discussions and the contract negotiations videos are actually being shared publicly after the meeting is over. So the first conversation recording was the meeting was last night, and that video was posted, and I think it's helpful for people to take a look at it to understand what's being asked for. I watched maybe 10 minutes of it last night, and we'll watch it over the course of the next couple of days. But I think it's a good picture. Will be good visibility into what the union is asking for and what the budget implications of that potentially will be.
Do you have any idea how people can find that link?
I can send that link.
That would be useful, and we can put it in our minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So unless there's anything else on public school related issues, we'll move to the last item, which was, Cliff, is your hand up? You're muted, Cliff.
No, my hand was not up. It's just
Okay,
distracting.
sorry. So we in looking over the long-term financial plan, a number of us noted the town's plan to move the current accelerated funding to the pension plan in order to bring it into compliance and its unfunded liability, essentially. And you will all recall that that is happening around 2030, and that there's roughly $40 million that's going into that currently every year in an effort to deal with that unfunded liability. And then the long-range plan suggested that the town would take those funds and apply it to the next unfunded liability, which are OPEBs. And we circulated a list of questions about that to the administration. And see if I can just pull that up. Which is this document that just went out last night. And it essentially is raising questions about the idea behind the plan and what are the legal requirements that we have. To what degree is this a discretionary policy, essentially? And whether there may be some other ways of thinking about what to do and how to do it. These are obviously very large sums that are being committed out of the budget for this purpose at a time when there may be other needs, there are other pressing needs. So these have just gone to the team. I don't know whether, if Lincoln is still on, whether he had any immediate comment on this or let's see.
Not at the moment. I'd want to review it, Sergio, but
Sure.
thanks.
Yeah, so, we gave them a heads up last week that this was coming, and then the memo only went out yesterday. So understandable, and this would be perhaps a topic for discussion also at the 23rd meeting, or it's possible that the sixth floor team will circulate some comments ahead of time, and if they do, we'll send those around.
Sergio?
Yes, Cliff.
So I just want to ask a question, because this memo says it's coming from the subcommittee. And I don't think the subcommittee actually saw this and voted on it to say that it was coming from us. I can understand sending this ahead of time to staff and just so they weren't blindsided, but maybe I thought that we would actually take a vote to ratify our interest in sending this.
That's a fair comment.
Yeah. Well, I agree, because not only for that purpose, but because the memo makes certain assumptions that the committee hasn't discussed or voted on.
So how would you guys like to proceed? You want to take some time to review this now? And perhaps Chair Green, you might want to help to start the conversation. What are some of the assumptions, for example, that you were thinking about?
I read this last night, so my, with that caveat, the sort of implication is that this is kind of a something that we do for reasons, or that by paying the OPEB liabilities with the additional monies that we get after we cover the pension liabilities, that we're really taking money from other uses that we don't really have the money for. And I guess my way of looking at the OPEB liabilities as well as the pension liabilities is that these are costs that we're shifting on to future um, um, yeah, future residents of the town. I mean, they're real liabilities. They have to be paid, and we either work to pay them now, or we just push them off into the future for our kids to pay. I guess that's the perspective I have, and I don't I seem to pick up that view is not I mean is actually questioned in the questions here.
Yeah, and I see, Cliff, I see your hand up, but I just wanted to make one important note for everyone. Currently, what we're doing is we're doing what's called pay as you go, meaning that we are expending monies from the town budget to meet the necessary draws for the OPEB, which is primarily retiree health care. And the model that is being offered is to fund, essentially is to create this pool that will then fund the future draws. And what I think our interest is primarily is to understand there's an implication that there is a fund that's somehow there now. We think, at least, we don't know. We think it may be invested. We don't know about that. We don't know what it's generating. And therefore, we don't quite understand when we make the annual payments that we're making now, which are in the range of $5.5 million. We don't quite know how much of that is because of the inability to get the current fund to produce enough money or not. And so, and we also understand that this is a result of obviously some deliberation that's taking place already through the finance team and the select board, but we don't know where to find that or where that information may lie. So in that sense, we are asking this question, but we're not drawing any assumption about it right now. We're just trying to learn, basically. That's
fair enough.
Yeah, Lincoln and then Cliff.
Yeah, just to preliminarily answer some of those questions. So it is these funds are invested with the State Retiree Benefits Trust Fund that is under the auspices of PRIM, the Public Reserves Investment Management, or PRIT, the trust,
PRIM, right.
Right, which is affiliated. That is the trust, into which the town invests its pension funds, and this is a separate fund that wherein the OPEB monies for future retiree health insurance is invested. That is where they are invested. There is a annual evaluation that is required by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, an annual evaluation by actuaries, by our actuary, that indicates what the town's outstanding liability is, and taking into account discount rate, et cetera. So just to preliminarily answer some of your questions. But again, I think this is a larger conversation.
Yeah.
So,
Fair enough. Cliff.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess I want to echo something that Sergio was alluding to, and Bernard, I think you rightly point out what's being done here and the reason it's being done. And I don't think anyone is suggesting that we not do it. I think back when BFAC did its work, at some point there was a conversation regarding OPEBs, and a question was raised about what is the current standard or a best approach to OPEB liabilities. And there was some discussion, I think it was like some group at Boston College had done a study and essentially was suggesting that pay-as-you-go or modified pay-as-you-go was not necessarily a bad approach. And I am not concluding anything. But I have always been curious because the state, imposed a requirement on municipalities at some point, and I am curious how much time they gave municipalities to fully fund their pension funds by a certain date, and that was 2040. And Brookline, chose a shorter date, which is great. I am curious how many years we gave ourselves versus what the state allowed. But there's no similar obligation or requirement from the state to do that with OPEBs. And I'm not saying that we should not have a program, but given the magnitude of the money we're talking about, and given the likelihood of these serial overrides having to or continue, the question really becomes, is there an approach that accomplishes the same thing, but doesn't require all that money to be going immediately to fund the OPEB liability over 4 or 5 years, as opposed to what was it, 15 or 18 or 20 years that we gave ourselves, I don't know what the time frame was, to fund pensions, and the state actually offered a lot longer. And so that to me is the purpose of this. It's to have that conversation, really go back and take a look at what is the best practice in this particular realm of municipal liabilities, understand what the rating agencies would look at and how they would evaluate any sort of a change. And maybe there's something to do, maybe there isn't, maybe, we can fund this over the same sort of time frame we funded the pension liability. It's a conversation. It's not a conclusion or a recommendation, from what I can tell. And I think it's certainly worth looking at.
Bernard?
I just wanted to echo what Cliff said. I mean, I think this is a critically important topic for us to include in our report, because the sort of simple way of looking at this is that we could use this money for better purposes than funding a liability that's sort of an abstraction, and that we're paying, an abstraction. So I think that we have to discuss this in a report. I think it's really important.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
So thank you. So to follow up on that, on Cliff's point, would somebody move this set of questions as something that future subcommittee would like to formally agree to and issue? even though we've sort of done that. So
I will move that. I mean,
can I get a second?
I second.
And can we do a roll call? Chair Green,
Yes,
Cliff,
yes.
Sadaf,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. So thank you. And the ball is now formally launched, if I can use that term. And thank you for that.
and we'll discuss it at the next meeting.
Presently, the thought was that we would let the sixth floor team give them time to do whatever they felt was necessary. We can slot it for the 23rd meeting of futures if they're ready at that time. If there's some information sooner than that, we can distribute that as well. But yes, thank you for that reminder. The next item was a very brief solar initiative update. This comes from the Solar Working Group. I was simply asked to inform the future subcommittee that the Solar Working Group has continued to work and meet with the town administrator, and he is currently working on making some determinations as to how he would like to proceed with this, which is a combination of seeking funds for a consultant to independently verify the results that the solar working team had, and then secondly, and most importantly, capital to carry out some projects. And so we're waiting at the moment to hear what the town administrator's recommendations on these are going to be. He's obviously juggling a lot of complicated problems, as we heard last night at the advisory committee. I don't have any other material. That is all that we had on the agenda. Are there any new business items or things that we want to bring up? No? Okay, then I think.
I have one
Yes,
question.
sit up.
So Sergio, as you think about, one of the things we're doing on the school side is thinking about what are our recommendations going to be within the subcommittee, and wanted to get a feel from your perspective about how you're thinking about that and on what timeline for this particular subcommittee. I'm starting to draft finally a revised outline for what we'll come forward with on the school subcommittee side. So just wanted to check in on
Yeah, so, fundamentally, I guess the thought is our dilemma, which we've talked about a little bit previously, is that because so many of the items that are on our list are those items which are actually before the town and the school subcommittees, but have a different time horizon. So in essence, this set of topics are basically the topics that I think that our report's going to include. It would include the development memo, whatever items out of the public school side that we think is useful, and the solar initiative. And those are basically what I'm aware of. So I've begun drafting a kind of an opening, if you will, an overview and so forth, and hoping that members will be able to produce or provide the information for the rest of these topics, and that they can be tucked in. What I'm imagining would be the usual executive summary, highlights and bullet points, followed by the supporting information for those who want greater detail. One thing I did want to ask, I saw, Sadaf, that you had asked Jesse for essentially where he is on the town report.
Yeah.
And he responded, but I didn't see the report itself. Did you?
I thought there was an attachment.
Okay, I have to go back and look at that. And I think part of what the idea there is simply that we would try to follow the format, which I think was what your idea was in asking Jesse where he was in his writing.
Right. Actually, you're right that there was no attachment to his latest message.
Right. So maybe you want to just follow up on that on both of
Yeah.
our behalves.
Yeah.
That would be very
Yeah.
helpful.
I hadn't gotten to this email yet, but
And just so everyone knows, periodically the 3 subcommittee chairs have met for this purpose to try to coordinate the development of the report. And it may be that we should try to schedule that after we see Jesse's frame, if you will, the framework. Just a thought. Okay. Any other business? All right, then we could take a move to adjourn. And
So moved.
all in favor, and if we're, I guess we are planning to reconvene a week, I'm sorry, on the 23rd. So that would be our next session. Thanks, all of you.
Thank you.
all right, thanks everybody. Bye.
Bye.